In the creation of a new role for a senior advisor of gender affirmation, is the University of Melbourne making a silly hire? A role to ensure that a staff or a student's gender identity is affirmed. In the past week, University of Melbourne has copped a lot of flack for this advert. Ridicule from Sky News, the popular comedian writer Glinner, people on Twitter, papers like the Daily Mail, during a time when UniMelb has cut 450 jobs. They are advertising a 6-figure job described as pointless, drain on funds for something as self-indulgent and woke as policing of others to make sure they affirm student and staff members' gender identity. I'm going to argue that there are very good reasons why University of Melbourne is doing that. Firstly, it has to. The University of Melbourne, or UniMelb, is signed up to AWEI, the Australian Workplace Equality Index. It's an audit. Organisations that sign up to ACON's Pride and Diversity Scheme pay to be audited against a benchmark or set of criteria created by ACON. There's many, but a few I've put on the screen. Providing additional special paid leave for transgender diverse employees to undergo sex reassignment or gender affirming medical procedures and surgeries, allowing males into women's toilets and changing rooms, and gender identity ideology training and compliance for all staff, and vetting of free speech events. So I'm only providing a few criteria, there's many of them, and you can pause the video to read, and I'll provide a link below to the actual AWEI standard documentation as well. A few more criteria, but notably note compelled pronouns and removal of gendered language. Overall, the audit measures how successfully gender theory or gender identity ideology is embedded into an organisation, and AWEI members are ranked against each other on a leaderboard on earning points for compliance. Those who earn the most points for compliance to these different criteria that get assigned different points of value, earn badges, and they have an end-of-year photo shoot. These days, ACON, who took Stonewall UK's Workplace Equality Index and localised it for Australia, is primarily a trans lobby. In the past, it used to do some amazing work in the HIV space, but when the pandemic for HIV went down, it seemed to have taken a different course altogether. So it produces things like the transhub.org as well as these pride and diversity audits. And the transhub.org promotes pharmaceutical products and markets medical organisations and doctors that medically and surgically transition or modify the bodies of young people to the appearance of the opposite sex in order for them to affirm their gender identity, i.e. cross-sex hormones, castration, double mastectomies, that kind of thing. One of the requirements is for a training and grievance officer, or in this case they've called it a senior advisor for gender affirmation. So you'll note in the job description the senior advisor is a point of contact for a complainer, for someone who's making complaints, maybe about serious things like harassment or discrimination, but also includes for any concerning behaviour another person might make towards them. And the job role also the person in this role acts as a reporting arm to an external organisation. So I'm going to give you a second reason why the University of Melbourne is doing this. Because in January this year, the Victoria Change of Suppression, Conversion, Practices, Prohibition Act 2021 came into play. It makes mandatory gender identity affirmation. It puts this into law. The main purpose of this act is to denounce, condemn, censure openly or publicly those who do not comply to mandatory gender identity affirmation in Victoria. The Act creates a civil response scheme within the Victoria Equal Rights and Human Rights Commission. It's called the Commission. And it acts to hear and act on complaints, to educate for compliance to gender identity ideology, and to sanction against non-compliance. It's essentially a judge, jury, and executioner. I don't think it's hyperbolic to say it's essentially a big brother overseeing that a gender affirmation culture will happen, because it ensures quite heavy sanctions that an organisation like UniMelb wants to avoid. We're talking worst case scenario from $500,000 or 3,000 points to $1 million, 6,000 points, and the threat of imprisonment 5 to 10 years. That's the second reason. Thirdly, I say UniMelb has complied with AWEI in creating this role for protection against an act that doesn't offer clarity on what this thing, gender identity, actually is, a thing we have to affirm. In the act, the sex and gender definition that has to be affirmed is so circular, so nebulous, it may have to be left to the Commission to decide the offence and criminal penalty. I would argue that this is a useful tool for increasing state power, and I suspect, therefore, it's by design. Because it creates a situation where it works to have the Commission to have ultimate say in any situation. But the threat of sanctions means that an acceptable certification to Victoria State Government may keep the Commission at bay. That's where ACON's Diversity Audit Australian Workplace Equality Index, AWEI, comes in. Even though ACON is a private institution, because the federal government, which includes, by the way, the Prime Minister's office, because the federal government and Victoria State and local governments are signed up to AWEI, including the Department of School Education or Education and the schools and universities, it offers protection. So, is UniMelb's job offer advert seem silly now? Overall, the AWEI creates a one-size-must-all-fit policy, rolling out to all the major institutions, organisations and companies, not just in Victoria but across Australia, which assists severe sanctions that any other state governments might enact for non-compliance. Key things to note: it works towards removing sex-based rights of women, removal of single-sex spaces, putting men in women's sports, in women's changing rooms, in women's toilets, in rape crisis centres, in women's prisons. It introduces compelled speech and removes gendered, and it removes a reality or evidence-based language. For example, when you are compelled to call a man a woman, you're actually making a sort of a cognitive dissonance between what you actually see and what you're actually supposed to express. It grows the spread of the ideology through requirements for organisation to audit their third-party vendors, so basic vendors and suppliers. So basically, it's a multi-level marketing scheme. And it requires AWEI-compliant organisations to market and proselyte gender identity ideology to everyone else. It creates a special class of LGBTQIA through rewards unavailable to other marginalised categories. So in relation to this new role, I got a hold of UniMelb's gender affirmation policy. And when they're talking about concerning behaviour, some of that is compelled speech and the removal of gendered language. Overseas, I mention this because overseas teachers and university professors have lost their jobs over this. I'll put some links below. And others like Kathleen Stock, Joe Phoenix and Rosa Freeman have not been protected from threats of rape, violence or death, let alone cause for them to lose the means of income. I just make a comment that in all cases around this gender identity ideology, it first seems that they first go to anybody who speaks against this or wants a discussion on this, they first try to remove them from their jobs. Interesting. This job, Senior Advisor for Gender Affirmation, is to dob those in who don't comply to gender identity ideology, this is the main part of the AWEI audit. The AWEI in Victoria provides some protection from the Commission in the form of proof of gender affirmation compliance. AWE provides a boots-on-the-ground mechanism that ensures leadership employees are trained in the compliance. Experts are brought in to create policy, marketing procedures, etc. This is what this job advert is about. And they introduce compelled speech, remove gendered language, and control what can or not be said if it upsets the trans and gender diverse community and their allies. So I ask again, is University of Melbourne's job advert seem silly now?